Hello, this is Musictechhelpguy, and welcome to episode 69 of my Logic Pro 10 video tutorial series. This is part 11 of my mixing mini-series, and once again, we're working with our song, Living on the Run. In this video, I'm going to correct something that I've been complaining about quite a bit over this entire mixing mini-series, and that is the snare drum. In this video, we're going to talk about a technique called drum replacement, sometimes drum doubling, where you can layer an existing drum sample with a layer or replace an existing drum sample with your existing track. Now, this sometimes drum replacement is shunned upon. Some people say, "Oh, it's fake. You're throwing a fake recording into something that's not a you're making the recording less organic." And I would agree that it does make the recording less organic, but in the world of audio engineering and mixing and editing, half of that is just creating an illusion of a perfect take. So sometimes this is necessary, and it's, believe it or not, it's extremely common in almost every single rock or heavy metal genre out there. And I sort of see this as something that's a bit better than maybe just using a MIDI drum kit. A lot of metal bands nowadays, some that I know, some that I've worked with, they don't want to record real drums because it's just too difficult. It's too time consuming, and it takes a lot of editing. It takes a lot of patience to do so. For me, I'd much rather work with a real drum kit, and then if I have to, layer the drum kit with samples rather than just completely working with a MIDI drum kit, because there's nothing real about a MIDI drum kit to me. It just sounds fake, If I replace my snare drum with a sample, it still sounds like a real drum kit. It's just the snare drum sounds enhanced. So to me, I'm totally okay with it. And if anything, it makes a lot of recordings sound a lot better. So let's just listen to our drum kit here, and you'll see what I'm talking about with the snare drum. After all I've done to it, adding expanders, compressor, the noise gate to it, just still doesn't sound right to me. So let's hit play here and just see what this sounds like. To me, it's not terrible, but it sounds like a steel shell snare drum that had no dampening on it whatsoever, and that's exactly what it was. So it's ringing a lot. It's got that tinny sort of steel shell sound, and really what I want is a shorter, beefier, like wooden sound, wooden shell snare. And so with drum replacement, we can do that. So the way drum replacement works in Logic is, believe it or not, there's a built-in drum replacement tool, which is more than you can say about most DAWs. Pro Tools doesn't have this. Pro Tools, albeit pretty much the standard for mixing nowadays, doesn't have a drum replacement tool built into it. You have to buy some sort of third-party plugin, as you have to do with many DAWs. One thing I will mention, though, is drum replacement really isn't a mixing technique. It's more or less an editing or a MIDI technique. I just happen to do it now because I'm doing it now in the series because it's something that I often do when mixing. And I'll ask a band, "Hey, do you want this to sound good, or do you want it to sound organic?" And most of the time, as soon as I drop a replaced snare in there, they're like, "Whoa, it's like night and day. It sounds so much better." And I can, if you get good at doing it, you can do it in a way so that it doesn't sound unreal. It just sounds better. So let's go ahead, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just select this snare bottom track. The reason I'm using the bottom track as a reference is because the top one has more bleed in it. As you can see, there's a bit more cymbal in it, whereas the bottom track doesn't have quite as much. So I'm going to go with the snare bottom as my reference track. I'm just going to mute the snare top. No reason for these plugins really to be on anymore because we're going to completely replace the snare drum with a sampled snare. Same thing goes for the snare bottom. I'm going to turn these plugins off. So the way drum replacement works in Logic is, with its drum replacement tool, it has the ability to sense transients in an audio recording and replace those transients with MIDI data, with a MIDI note. And then what you can do is you can go assign a MIDI instrument, like a drum instrument, like drummer, for instance, or maybe a custom-built EXS24 instrument, or maybe a third-party drum instrument like Drumagog or some of the Slates, the Slate drum machine or the drum kit or Easy Drummer or Superior Drummer or something, whatever. So the way you do this is you click on the track, you go to track, and you go to replace or double drum track. And the key command for this is Control D. And what it's going to do is it's going to analyze the transients in that track and then produce a MIDI or instrument track just below that track. So for now, I'm going to solo out these two. I just want to hear these two alone. And then you'll get this drum replacement doubling dialog up. Normally, by default, it'll start with the reference instrument as kick. I'm going to go to snare. Really, the only thing that this changes is it changes what set of drum samples you're picking from the drum library. I'm not actually going to use any of these. I'm going to use the drummer plugin instead. But for now, I'll just stick the instrument on snare. The other thing I should mention about drum replacement is that, well, first of all, I'm sorry I'm so wordy with this. I just want to make sure I'm very specific about everything. Just trying to make sure I'm giving you a very accurate, detailed description of what to do and how to do it, because it can be, this process, if you don't know how to do it correctly or if you skip a step, can be really annoying at times. Once you learn how to do it, it makes it a lot easier. But what I was saying is that drum replacement is not something you want to do to cymbals or overhead mics. It's something you want to do just for your close-up drum tracks, kick, snare, toms, pretty much. And that's pretty much it. So I'm going to go to snare. You can choose the mode replacement or doubling. Replacement, there really is no difference between the two. All it does is replacement. It keeps the top track unmuted. And if you say doubling, it doesn't mute the top track. It really doesn't matter. It's not going to affect the actual analysis at all. And the relative threshold is basically the sensitivity that Logic is, or the sensitivity of the analysis. So as you pull up or down the threshold, you're going to get more and more MIDI notes down here in your MIDI region. So if I pull this up, we have more sensitivity. We're going to get less of them. If you just pull it down, you're going to get more of them. What you have to make sure you do is you have to make sure, let me just close out the library here. What you have to make sure you do is you want to make sure that for each drum hit in your audio recording, you have one MIDI note. You're occasionally going to get other MIDI notes that correspond to, say, kick hits or some other crosstalk or bleed. There's really no way to avoid this. It all depends on how isolated the drum recording is. But in the end, we want to make sure we have one MIDI note for every snare drum hit up here, even if it means we have to go in and edit out these other hits. So I'm gonna pull this down a bit just to make sure we get everything taken care of. I'm gonna put it on negative 12.9. The trigger note is basically what MIDI note's gonna trigger the snare drum down here. By default, according to the MIDI GM drum kit, snare drum is either D1 or E1. It defaults to D1. So I'm just gonna say keep it on auto. And I'm gonna make the timing offset 0 milliseconds. And I'm just gonna hit OK. There we go. Let me just zoom out again so we can see everything. I'm just going to solo out my snare bottom and solo out the snare bottom plus track, which is our new MIDI region. I'm just going to double click and rename that snare plus. And what we're going to do is we're going to go through this whole recording, and this is where it can get frustrating and time consuming, especially if you're new to this, is we're going to go through this entire recording and we are going to get rid of every single note that doesn't need to be there. How can you tell? Well, after looking at waveforms for over a decade, I can tell which one's a snare drum and which one's not a snare drum. The loud ones are snares. The soft ones are probably crosstalk and bleed from toms and kick drum, unless it's like a real soft snare drum. So what I'm going to do off screen is I'm going to go through and I'm going to delete everything that is not a snare drum. And the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to put my snap mode in ticks. I'm going to use the marquee tool, and I'm going to go through, and I'm just going to delete everything that isn't a snare drum, just like so. You could open this up in the MIDI editor, and you could delete the notes one by one. You can do that as well. It's not really any more or less accurate that way. I find it's just, It's easier if you have two displays, because then you can open up the MIDI editor on one window, and then you can open up the arrange window on another window, and then you can sort of edit out the notes that way. For this tutorial, I think this way is going to be easier for most people, just going through and deleting the notes that are not snare drums. But this will take a while, but the benefit of it is well worth it in my opinion. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to off-screen this, and I'll be right back, and then I'll show you the result that I got. All right, so we're back. I went through the whole song, and I edited out everything that wasn't a snare drum. It takes a few minutes, but the more you do it, the easier it gets. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to merge all these into one MIDI clip just by clicking on the snare plus track, hitting Command J, which joins them all together. There is one particular issue with this that I'll show you right now, actually. In this song, there's a lot of flams at certain points, and a flam is just where there's two snare hits at once. So what we're going to have to do eventually is go in and manually add in each of these, the second note of each of these flams, just so it sounds like a flam instead of just a single hit. But before we do that, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to quantize the playback of all these MIDI notes. You're thinking, well, didn't it accurately analyze them? Well, yes and no. Sometimes it tends to put notes slightly ahead or slightly behind where they're supposed to go. And before I even started this mixing series, I edited these drums to be perfectly in place. I used flex time, and I quantized all of the snares, all the big hits, to be right on the grid. So I want all of the MIDI notes to be right on the grid too. If this was a recording that maybe you didn't use flex time on, then you can skip this step. Don't do this step. So I'm just going to hit Command A in my MIDI editor to select all the notes. I believe the fastest rhythm I have is really just a quarter note. So I'm going to choose, I'll choose an eighth note to be safe. But I'm actually, no, at the end there were some eighth notes, weren't there? Yeah, there were some eighth notes, so I'll do eighth note. So eighth note, there we go. The other thing is you'll see that all of, actually this brings up a good point. You'll see all the notes are like actually ahead of where they're supposed to be. Let me undo that quantization real quick, and I'll tell you why. Logic has always had this weird thing where if the front end of a MIDI region doesn't snap to like a beat or a bar, it'll actually offset your quantization because I guess it's syncing the beat clock to wherever the entrance of the MIDI region is. So to make this not happen, I'm just going to change my snap mode to beat, change this to snap to absolute value, and I'm just going to trim the MIDI region to be right up against measure 9 there, flush with measure 9. Then when I open this up, I can quantize to an eighth note again, and everything snaps where it's supposed to snap and not ahead of where it's supposed to snap. The next thing I'm going to do is you'll notice that not all of the velocities are the same. Logic attempts to put a certain velocity setting on each note in the analysis based on how loud the drum was, but it's not entirely accurate. So normally what I do is I just make all of these the same velocity. Just hit Command A, grab the velocity tool, and hold Option while you use it, drag up or down. It'll just make everything the same velocity. I'm just going to put everything at the max velocity, 127. And if you wanted to go back and make certain notes a little softer than others, just for little subtleties, and maybe making some of the softer hits actually sound softer, you'd have to go back and do that manually. Since this is a rock song, I'm okay with it. There's a lot of, I pretty much want dynamic uniformity. So let me just zoom out so we can see the whole thing now. There you go. And I've got my snare replacement track. I have muted my other two snares up here. One thing I'm going to do with this is I don't want to use the stock snare sound that they gave me. It's an EXS24 instrument. I actually want to use one of the drummer instruments. So I'm just going to unload the plugin there, and then I'm going to load the drum kit designer in stereo. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose, the one I liked was the SoCal kit. And it wasn't the first snare in the SoCal kit, it was the second one. I like that one. Actually, let's use the first one in the SoCal kit. And the only thing you have to make sure is that the note that you actually want is actually on the note that's here. So in order to do so, I should have done it, but hang on. Oh, I got my MIDI out turned off. Let me turn that back on. There we go. There's another real harder one up there on E1, but I like the sound of this one better. All right, so I've got my MIDI editor closed now. Let me just hear what this sounds like now with just the drums. Now we're not hearing it yet because as you can see here, this is grayed out. The reason why is what I did is I turned on my drum bus, my drum mix. So I want to make sure that my replacement snare also goes to that same drum mix that we created earlier. So I'm just going to go to its output, go to bus, and make it go to the drum mix that we created earlier. So there we go. So now it'll sound. So that's the after. Here's the before. This new replacement snare really hits a lot harder. It's a lot punchier. It's also completely isolated. It's just MIDI data. And the thing about this, and the reason why I don't feel so bad about doing this, is that we're still hearing the original snare in the overheads and in the room mics and in the bleed and the tom mics. We're more or less just replacing the close mic of the snare with a sample, and it's going to come out better in the mix than the original did, and it's not going to have all that nasty ring and that metallic sound that it has. The only other thing we really need to do now is we need to go through, and every single time in the original recording there was a flam, I need to go artificially create a flam with the with either in the MIDI editor, or I can just copy and paste it out here. What I'm going to opt to do is just set my snap mode to division, select just that note, click on it to cut it out, and then I'm just going to hold Option to sort of duplicate it. And I'm going to switch over to ticks mode just to put it right in line with the other one. So basically this is the first note, this is the second note of the flam. And I'm going to do that for the whole thing. So I'll do this off screen and then I'll be right back. All right, I'm back. What I actually ended up doing was I ended up just taking that very first slice that I took out, copying it, just doing a Command-C. And then what I ended up doing was just going through and then placing the playhead right on each of the flams and then just pasting it in, just doing Command-V. That ended up being a little faster than trying to do that for each one. I will say that is one of the more frustrating things to do, but it is what it is. You know, we got to do what we got to do to get to the ultimate goal, and that is making our snare drum sound good. So I'm just going to click on the snare track again, do another Command-J to join everything together, and now all of my flams are nice and flammy. There we go, even in the replacement tracks. Now that I don't really need these other snare tracks anymore, I'm not going to delete them. What I am going to do is, of course, mute them, and I'm going to hit H and hide them. I don't really need them out here anymore. I want to still have them there just in case, but I don't need them out in the mix because I'm not really going to be using them anymore. The last thing we can do here, and the one last thing to mention is that the great thing about doing it this way is that I can swap out the snare drum for another snare whenever I want. If I decide that I don't like this snare later on, I can go back into my drum kit designer or throw a third-party plugin on there and swap it up for something else. What I will say is that I'm not a big fan of having MIDI out here because it eats up more processing power than just having audio. So what I'm going to do is click on the track, do Control-B to bounce in place, and I'll just call this snare plus audio, and this will bounce this in place. And then what I'm going to do is after this bounces is I'm going to I'm not going to delete the snare plus track. I'm just going to mute it and hide it just like I did with the other ones. So it's still there if I want to swap out the snare later, but now I've just got a dedicated audio track for my snare drum. And again, I just have to, let's change the icon to be snare. Oh, it's under drums. Snare drum, there we go. And then just double check and make sure it's also going to the bus, same bus as all the other drums. And now I can mix this just like any other drum. So let's see what this sounds like. And there we go. The reason why I'm not playing the whole song with it is that I keep getting flagged for copyright, even though I own the song. It's basically referencing my CD Baby account and telling me that I'm copyright infringing my own song. So to avoid that, I'm not playing everything. So I'll do a demonstration with everything in it when we get to the end. So that's drum replacement in a nutshell. You know, it's a really, really difficult technique to get used to using and to do well. What I will say is that I'm probably going to, I know I'm going to get a lot of hate comments below about doing this. You know, why not just record it right the first time? You know, why not just use more mics? You know, why not use a better snare drum? Well, sometimes you don't always have that. And when it comes to isolation, I mean, just forget about it. I mean, if the hi-hat is anywhere close to the snare drum, you're not going to get enough isolation to mix the drum, the snare, the way you want to mix it. You know, unless you have an open-handed player or someone who has a hi-hat that's on the right side of the kit, you're not going to get that. You could also, I mean, an alternative to this would just be to have the snare, have the drummer go back out in the studio and just play in the snare drum by itself. You know, there's always that option as well, but you know, this is going to be easier to do, you know, than I mean, it's going to take a lot of work, you know, and a lot of practice to get right, but it's going to be easier than having the drummer come back out just to record snare or just to record kick. There are many other ways to do this. There's a lot of plugins that do this, you know, Sound Replacer for Pro Tools. Massey has a drum replacement tool. There's lots of different ways to do this. And just trust me when I say that this is I'm not going to say it's the fastest way to do it, but to me, it's, in my opinion, this is the most accurate way to do this. I've done this exact same technique on hundreds of recordings. So just trust me when I say this is the most accurate way to do it. And it takes a lot of practice. You're not going to get it right on the first time. It's going to take a lot of practice to get it the way you want it to sound. So the other thing I'll say is that if you have a really complex groove with a lot of like ghost notes and things like that in it, this is pretty much, you know, it's just standard rock and roll. There's just loud hits. There's not any sort of soft hits, you know. If you have a lot of soft hits and a lot of ghost notes for like jazz or something that's a little more groovy than this, you're going to have a really difficult time replacing, because then you're going to have to go in and edit all the velocities of all the notes to make the ghost notes, you know, quieter. And at that point, it's almost not worth doing it. So sometimes, you know, depending on the genre, it's not really worth doing drum replacement. The other alternative would be to, you know, layer the replacement track with your original track, but then you run into phase issues, you know, and sometimes it just doesn't sound right to have both the replacement track and the original track blended together. All right, so as always, you can purchase this session if you want to practice this. I'll put a link down in the description below, and I hope you enjoyed the video, and thanks again for watching.